When you hear the word infrastructure, what comes to mind? Maybe roads, bridges? Funding for infrastructure is at the forefront of America's collective consciousness. But what about water infrastructure? If you're a What About Water listener, then you've heard us referencing emerging contaminants before. These are compounds that have been detected in drinking water only in recent years, and ones that are newly regulated by the New York State Department of Health as of 2020. To comply with these new regulations, water suppliers like SCWA must install new, state-of-the-art filtration systems to remove compounds like PFOS, PFOA, and 1,4-dioxane from drinking water. But the technology to remove 1,4-dioxane is also new and extremely expensive. SCWA engineers developed and installed the first 1,4-dioxane treatment system in New York State history back in 2018. But over the next few years, we'll have to install more than 50 similar treatment systems just to meet these regulations. A mission that will cost tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for Suffolk County alone. The big question is, who pays for it all and how? I'm Jeff Szabo, Chief Executive Officer of the Suffolk County Water Authority, and this is What About Water? Tim Kilcommons is our Chief Engineer and Director of Research and Development. It's Tim's team who's responsible for the design, construction, and installation of new treatment systems. Tim, thank you for taking some time to join me today. I know you've been very busy.
Jeff, thanks for having me.
What is an AOP treatment system and how does it work?
Well, AOP stands for Advanced Oxidation Process. And what it is we introduce an oxidant, in our case it's hydrogen peroxide, into the presence of UV or ultraviolet light. And the ultraviolet light creates hydroxyl radicals that want to bond with other molecules. And so what they do is they actually break up the molecules, the target molecules, which is 1,4-dioxane. And that's how we remove or destroy 1,4-dioxane in water.
Tim, how many of these systems will we need and how are the locations chosen?
Well, we expect the total build-out will be more than 50 systems. We've already begun work. We have identified what we call our Phase 1 AOP projects, which are addressing any well that's above the MCL of 1. We have 7 building additions that are already underway, under construction. 5 of those are completed. We have 2 new buildings, one that's under contract and construction has started. The other one is in design right now. And we expect to be tackling these over the next couple of years. We also purchased 16 AOP reactors to address 9 locations where we received grant money. Those are expected to begin delivery as of December of this year.
So on top of the Water Authority's annual typical capital work to address, like work at our well fields and pump stations, looking for new supply, and of course our maintenance program, this has thrown quite a bit of additional work at our employees.
Yeah, it definitely has. The engineering department, our production control department, our laboratory, we're all throwing resources at this every day on the design side, on the construction side, to get these things in place.
Overall, Tim, how much will these projects cost altogether?
Yeah, so at 50 AOP systems, and we know we'll be above that, we're estimating each AOP at about $1.5 million, so that's in excess of $75 million just to treat 1,4-dioxane.
And when we look at not only capital costs, but also the cost for AOP and the cost for PFOA and PFOS and getting granular activated carbon in place, plus ongoing operational costs, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, if not close to over $1 billion for Long Island.
Yeah, that's right. And this will continue on an annual basis, like you said, for the operation and maintenance of these systems once they're in place.
I know we've applied for New York State grants. What have we received so far, and what's still pending?
Yeah, just in excess of $14 million.
And we still have other applications pending?
We do, and we are trying to identify more projects that might be eligible for funding as well.
So, Tim, as I mentioned, the Water Authority's capital budget is typically between $75 and $85 million a year. And over the last several years, we've been aggressive in seeking to offset the cost for our ratepayers by seeking state and federal grants. Can you give us an example of one of the grants we applied for and were awarded?
Yeah, Jeff. Shortly after Sandy and Irene hit, we along with other water suppliers recognized the need to harden our infrastructure and do projects that could help protect us from storms, and a grant program came out known as the SMLP, or Storm Mitigation Loan Program. And we were able to put together an application for $17 million worth of generator backup, and we were able to accelerate our own capital program for installing backup systems at our pump stations.
I understand that there's a new round of state funding with a submission deadline of November 22nd. My understanding is we plan to be extremely aggressive in trying to secure funds for not only AOP systems, but also other capital work that's needed at the Water Authority.
That's right. We have more AOP systems that we've already identified. We'll be putting in grant applications for those. And then, as you alluded to, there is still lots of capital work to be done for other treatment, storage, and just water supply.
Sounds like you've got a lot of work to do, Tim.
I do. We're very busy.
Thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Earlier this month, Governor Hochul announced more than $44 million has been made available for drinking water and wastewater projects across New York State. This funding is administered through the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation. Joining me to break it all down is President and CEO of the Environmental Facilities Corporation, Maureen Coleman. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us on What About Water?
Thank you for the time to speak with you.
Tell us a little bit about the Environmental Facilities Corporation and the organization's mission.
Sure. So EFC is a public benefit corporation and a state public authority within the executive branch, and our mission is to provide low-cost capital or financing and grants, as well as technical assistance for water quality improvement projects, primarily for municipalities or local governmental entities. We provide financial assistance for local wastewater, stormwater, and drinking water infrastructure through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund programs, or the SRF. And since 2015, through state grants, primarily the Water Infrastructure Improvement, WIA grants, and the Intermunicipal Water Infrastructure grants, including grants specifically for addressing emerging contaminants, an issue that I know is important to Suffolk County and the Suffolk County Water Authority especially.
For sure. We have, since 2015, we've been very aggressive in trying to secure some of that funding. In one instance that comes to mind, under an intermunicipal grant, and in others, just standalone applications for treatment to remove previously unregulated compounds. So it's been a big help to us.
Yes, since actually 2019, we've awarded 12 drinking water WIA, IMG, or emerging contaminant grants to the Suffolk County Water Authority for a total amount of $19.8 million.
That's amazing. Sometimes I didn't want to, you have the specifics right in front of you. I didn't want to brag.
I guess we could both brag a little.
Yeah.
Three of the projects totaling $7.2 million are actually already in a grant agreement with us, and $6.4 million of that grant money, or roughly 90% of the total, has already been dispersed. So that's great. It's being put to use. And the remaining 9 grant awards totaling $12.6 million are scheduled to be approved at EFC's December board meeting.
Excellent.
So all of that $19.8 million, Suffolk County Water Authority and its water districts will be putting that money to work. And then 10 of the 12 grants total were for projects addressing emerging contaminants, all of them for installation of new advanced oxidation process systems to remove 1,4-dioxane.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's been a tremendous help. As we've been dealing with 1,4-dioxane and PFOA and PFOS in our service territory here, the grants made available by the state have been extremely important because at the end of the day, any grant that we get from the state or from the federal government helps reduce the cost that our residents are paying presently to get treatment and to keep drinking water safe. So it's much appreciated.
Right, and with respect to emerging contaminants, the grants will pay 60% of the total project cost of those emerging contaminants projects with no cap. Our other water grants generally pay for drinking water. We'll pay 60% of project costs up to a maximum of $3 million. But for emerging contaminants, we will pay the entire 60% with no cap, given the importance of addressing emerging contaminants. Also, in 2018, 2019, I know the Suffolk County Water Authority was advocating for its customers and made the very good point that that $3 million cap on water grants specifically, and now there is no cap for emerging contaminants, so was causing a problem because you as the water authority provided, water supply for so many municipalities, and so putting a $3 million cap on the water authority was problematic because it's spread over all of the customers that you serve. So because of your advocacy, we actually, for the Suffolk County Water Authority and all water authorities across the state, we apply the $3 million cap to the municipalities on whose behalf the authority is applying. So we did make that change a few years ago. And again, though, for emerging contaminants, very important to point out yet again that it's 60% of the total project cost with no cap.
Yeah, we appreciate that. That was, this is an instance where I think we can look back, and certainly you can look back and say, this is government, working together, right? Identifying a problem and then us expressing that to EFC, and then EFC understanding what we were trying to say and not allowing it to be, a disadvantage because of our size, and revising their policy to allow for greater than $3 million. So that really worked to everyone's advantage, and we very much appreciate that.
Yeah. It's great, and certainly made sense at the time. We try to implement these projects, the best we see fit up front, but it's not until we get experience, we go out for a little bit and we learn from folks who are taking advantage of these grants how we might need to change our rules or our policies with respect to implementing the grants so that they can be taken advantage of to the utmost.
Considering drinking water issues across the state and various entities impact due to COVID and everything else, this must be a very competitive time. Different agencies, whether you're in Buffalo or Westchester County or Long Island, submitting applications to EFC for consideration. Can you explain a little bit the process of determining which projects are approved for funding and which aren't?
Sure. So for drinking water projects, we get a lot of applications for the dollars that are made available, which is why we did put the $3 million cap on generally, because we thought that that would help most projects that came in, given the cost of drinking water projects, and yet be able to spread the grants around to as many projects as possible, given again the demand for those grants. So for the drinking water SRF, and then for the grants, because we use generally the same criteria for determining, who gets those grants, the projects are scored or ranked so that the projects that address the most serious risks to public health are given the highest priority. And the highest priority is given to acute public health risks, followed by chronic risks, and then infrastructure upgrading needs. The financial needs of the applicant community are also always considered. For state grants, we also add on to that readiness, because we think that is so important for these state grants, because we want to make sure, that the money that's put out there for these state grants, and the state has made, a $4 billion commitment to water quality projects statewide, that we want to get that grant money out the door and in the ground in projects as quickly as possible. So we want to know that a municipality or a water authority such as yourself knows the project that they want to undertake with the grant dollars, And, you'd be surprised how many actually don't have, a fully baked project when they come to us. We've had some difficulty moving some of these grants from award to getting into an agreement with us and getting the money out the door. And, we want to fund good projects, but we want to balance that also with folks who would have a complete application and are ready to move. There's always the opportunity, for those applicants that don't have a complete application or a project that's ready to move forward. They can always reapply or apply in the first instance in another round, the next round of financing. And we expect that this state money will be, available for some time to come.
I know there's been a lot of talk at the federal level of this infrastructure bill, President Biden's Build Back Better infrastructure bill. And I think it's presently being held up, but people I talked to are optimistic that it'll be approved, and there will be some money for drinking water agencies across the country. It's my understanding that those funds will be dispersed to the state revolving funds. Is that your understanding too?
Yes, that is our understanding, that all the money is going to come through the state revolving funds. So we would be working with the Department of Health, as we do with the emerging contaminants grants and the drinking water SRF, to get that money out the door. And we expect that there'll be a significant influx of funds to New York, and a lot of pressure to, again, get that money out the door as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's really been a historic between the commitment that the president has made for infrastructure and the commitment that New York State has made for drinking water projects. This is really a very exciting, and considering the challenges that suppliers face with unregulated and soon to be regulated compounds, this is really an exciting time to be in a position to help New Yorkers get safe drinking water, and using some of the grants and funds that are available to reduce those costs.
Yes, it's a great time. We'll talk about the announcement that Governor Hochul made during Climate Week with respect to $600 million available for water infrastructure projects, and the application deadline for that, for our $400 million that EFC administers, is coming up the Monday before Thanksgiving, November 22nd. So that's important, and a lot of money. Also, Governor Hochul has announced an additional $1 billion to bring up the total amount to $4 billion for the Bond Act, and proposes to rename it as the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act. So that there's another $1 billion on top of the $4 billion that already been made available in the state, and the federal infrastructure dollars. So there's going to be a lot of money to go around for water projects and drinking water projects, especially, I think. And EFC has already spoken with EPA. EFC and DOH has already spoken with EPA, and we will continue those discussions as the bill develops and as it gets, made into law. And we know what the specifics are, and what EPA knows what the specifics are. So as they develop guidance on how we implement those dollars and any new programs that may be developed under the bill.
Maureen, it sounds like you're going to be very, very busy.
We will be very, very busy, but all good things.
All good things.
Yes, one thing EFC does that's great is we don't regulate. We give out lots of money, so it's a good job to have.
That's true, and you're doing very good work. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us related to the role of the EFC or other opportunities that may be coming up that the listeners should be aware of?
Well, I did want to, as I just indicated, announce that we do have the state water grants program was announced. So, again, during Climate Week, Governor Hochul announced $600 million in grants for water infrastructure and resiliency projects statewide. $400 million of that will be administered by EFC for the water infrastructure improvement grants, emerging contaminant grants, and the intermunicipal water infrastructure grants. So we've already, put out the call for applications. As I said, applications will be due by 5 p.m. November 22nd, and make sure that you make that deadline. People wait to the last minute, and if a problem arises, not always have time to fix that problem. These grants, 25% for wastewater projects, but importantly, it's 60%. You get 60% of the cost of an eligible drinking water project, which we've already discussed, up to $3 million. It's an emerging contaminant. You get 60% of the total cost. And then if it's a joint project, a municipality undertaking a project with one or more other municipalities, like a consolidation of services, you can get 40% of the eligible costs up to $30 million.
Thank you so much for that information. A lot of the suppliers on Long Island are busy working to put together applications for EFC's consideration. In fact, the staff here at the Suffolk Water Authority has had conversations. We've developed a sort of a priority list. So we plan to get our applications in for consideration before that November 22nd deadline.
Good. And I encourage people to reach out to EFC. We're always here to answer any questions about an application or about a project. Better to call and get any questions answered as soon as possible so we can work with you on the application, and then we certainly work with people, after we award a grant to move their project forward.
I can't thank you enough, Maureen. I appreciate your time and your insight into the funding opportunities in New York State through the Environmental Facilities Corporation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for the time to speak with you.
Since 2016, the Suffolk County Water Authority has received just over $29 million in grant funding when combining treatment system projects, well replacement, and new water main installation. We'll be applying for an additional $61.7 million for this year's November funding deadline. We'll be right back after a quick water break with Correspondent Seth Wallach.
Thanks, Jeff. This year, SCWA is celebrating its 70th anniversary in operation. So I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight some SCWA history. On this month, in 1958, Brookhaven Town, the largest township in Suffolk County, approved a resolution calling for the extension of public water facilities in fast-growing areas. This resolution was in response to Suffolk County Health Department concerns that detergents were seeping into private well water. SCWA shared this concern and amended its policies, allowing for as much as 60 feet of public water main to be installed in densely populated communities in Brookhaven, Babylon, and Islip, free of charge to residents. This new policy helped connect about 5,000 homes in Lindenhurst, North Babylon, and West Islip to safe, reliable public water. Oh, and since we're talking about AOP treatment systems today, I should probably mention November of 2016, when SCWA first received New York State Health Department approval to proceed with our first AOP pilot project at our commercial boulevard well field in Central Islip. The pilot project was the first of its kind in New York State. Jeff?
Thanks, Seth. Joining me now is Dan Hartnett. Dan is the Chief Advocacy Officer for the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs for the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. Dan, it's great to have you on the podcast. We appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me.
I think the first question we want to talk about is AMWA and your role and how the organization is working to support water suppliers across the country.
So the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, or AMWA, is an organization representing the nation's largest publicly owned drinking water systems. We have nearly 200 member utilities across the country, nearly all of them serving more than 100,000 people each. So we advocate on Capitol Hill in support of water infrastructure investment and other legislative priorities. And we also work with EPA on science-based drinking water regulations. And a big part of that lately has been infrastructure investment in the context of the big infrastructure bill that Congress is currently debating.
Dan, the infrastructure bill that's being debated in Congress now, is this a historic bill? Is this something that Congress really hasn't addressed in many years? Give us a little bit of perspective of the significance of the bill being considered.
Yeah, so every year Congress does regular appropriations legislation where they provide funding for EPA and its various water infrastructure programs each year. So that's kind of routine. What this infrastructure bill is a little bit different is that it would be an infusion of additional money on top of that for infrastructure priorities over the next 5 years. So in terms of water and wastewater infrastructure, the bill is approved by the Senate back in August and currently, as of today, pending before the House, would provide nearly $50 billion in additional dollars for drinking water and wastewater investments at EPA. Again, like I said, above and beyond the regular appropriations that we would expect over the next 5 years. So it's something that doesn't come along very often. So it's a really big opportunity.
And assuming that the bill is approved, the funding will be routed, will it go directly to the drinking water agencies across the nation, or will it go to state agencies to administer?
It would go through the states, mainly through the SRFs, the Drinking Water and Clean Water SRF programs. So each state would get a portion of the funds based on their regular allocation that is in the statute for the SRFs, and then they would be distributed to local communities at the state level based on the priority lists and other priorities that the legislation would outline in terms of how the money should be spent.
And Dan, you mentioned SRF a couple of times. What does SRF stand for?
That's the State Revolving Fund, which is a pot of loan funding that goes from EPA to states to loan out and then be paid back to support water infrastructure at the local level.
There's funding for lead service lines. There's funding for water main replacement. There's funding, I would hope, for treatment to remove harmful compounds.
Yeah, that's right. So the big pots of money in the bill, there's $11.7 billion each to the Drinking Water SRF and the Clean Water SRF, which could be for a variety of infrastructure and public health initiatives. Then there's a separate dedicated $15 billion pot of lead service line replacement money that would be distributed via the Drinking Water SRF. And then another $10 billion pot to help drinking water wastewater systems address PFAS and other emerging contaminants.
That's excellent. It sounds historic to me. This is on top of some of the funding that the individual states are trying to provide for drinking water purposes across the country. So it's really a historic time for drinking water suppliers to try to take a bite at the apple and to submit applications and to receive some federal dollars for some of these important projects.
Yep, that's right.
Is this part of President Biden's Build Back Better agenda?
Infrastructure has been a key piece of the Build Back Better package since it's been discussed over the course of the year. So the Senate has there's different components to the Build Back Better package. There's a social spending bill that's currently being formulated right now, but then there's this separate infrastructure bill, which the Senate passed back in August and since then it's been on hold in the House because leadership wants to move the infrastructure bill in tandem with the social spending bill. So we don't expect any changes to be made to the infrastructure bill. It just has to wait till the whole package is done. But that's what includes the nearly $50 billion for drinking water and wastewater programs.
And agencies like the Suffolk County Water Authority, this is an important time to work with organizations like AMWA and yourself in advocating to elected members of Congress in both the House and the Senate, urging them to support this type of bill.
That's right. They need to hear that water infrastructure is a priority, that utilities need it, the public needs it, the public wants it, and that they can't forget about water infrastructure in the context of a big historic bill like this.
And how receptive do you think members of Congress are when it comes to providing funding for drinking water purposes? Is this something that they're very open and eager to support?
I mean, they included the significant sum in the infrastructure bill. There was a lot of work that went into that. We've been working on this issue for most of the past year, honestly, since it was originally developed by the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and it was rolled into a separate water infrastructure bill that passed. And then that was folded into the infrastructure bill, and that came together. So there was a lot of steps leading up to it, but it all is because there was a recognition, among people on the Hill and I think among the public that water infrastructure can't be forgotten. And there are serious needs here that need to be addressed, and this is the opportunity to do it.
So what advice, Dan, would you give to some of the suppliers across the country related to the pending legislation? What can they do to help themselves?
So really build relationships with your state regulators and your state agencies that will actually administer the funds. For the SRF programs, every state has a priority list that guides how the state share of SRF funding is distributed. So see if you can get your project on that list so it does have a shot at this SRF money when the funding becomes available. So also explore EPA's WIFIA program, which offers low-cost loans for major water infrastructure projects that are generally expected to cost more than $20 million each. And then finally, stay in touch with your federal elected officials. There have been more rumblings in Washington recently about a possible return of earmarks, at least to some degree. And so while there may be differing opinions on the value of earmarks, the bottom line is that earmarks could offer opportunities for utilities to directly receive federal dollars from water infrastructure. So the first step is just really making elected officials aware of your needs.
That's great advice, Dan. And I know we've been very aggressive here at the Water Authority, trying to secure every dollar we can to offset some of the significant costs that we are encountering when it comes trying to get sort of a new treatment in place to remove things like 1,4-dioxane and PFOA, PFOS. But that has been primarily through the state. This opportunity at the federal level really is something that we all need to pay attention to and be aggressive to help reduce the cost for our customers. So what does the public need to know, and what's the general takeaway?
For the general public, it's easy to forget about the importance of drinking water infrastructure. You just turn on the tap and the water's there and it's ready to drink. Because the pipes are buried underground, it's really out of sight, out of mind a lot of the time. It's not like a pothole that you drive over to remind you about investing in roads, or a rusty bridge that reminds you about the importance of maintaining transportation infrastructure. But drinking water is so vitally important to public health, and so much work goes into treating, disinfecting, and delivering the water. It's a really expensive undertaking, as you know, and water rates pay for all this, but federal assistance can stretch those ratepayer dollars further. So that's why we can't let policymakers forget about it, and that's why it's so important for Suffolk County Water Authority and other utilities to publicize what you're doing to keep the water safe and what resources you need to keep that work going.
Dan, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast today with us. We really appreciate your perspective.
Thanks for having me.
After our conversation with Dan, Congress passed a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill on November 5th that includes funding for transportation, broadband internet access, and utilities. The legislation invests $55 billion in the nation's water systems. What About Water is produced by Jeff Szabo, Tim Moats, and Seth Wallach. This episode was edited and engineered by Seth Wallach. Be sure to follow the Suffolk County Water Authority on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, I'm Jeff Szabo.
I'm more into the Long Island Water podcast. Oh, yeah, the Suffolk County Water podcast. Yes, I'd love to be a guest on that one.